But today we're going to talk about Ring Central, and I'll just do a quick introduction in case people join us or watch later and they want to know who's talking. So Ben Greiner, president of Forget Computers, and you guys want to introduce yourself, starting with Chad?
Sure. Hi, I'm Chad.
Chad.
Hi,
Michelle.
I'm Chad.
I am Michelle Charles.
And Wyatt.
Hey there, I'm Wyatt.
So we know not a lot of people actually listen or watch this, but we're going to keep doing it anyway. We do have a few people who join us and participate and ask questions, and I know some people will watch later. And this is going to be a resource where we could send people later.
Yes.
Specifically if they work or struggle with Ring Central. And, you know, I feel a little conflicted because we've gone through over many years of working with different voice over IP providers, VoIP providers. And by far, Ring Central is the best in my experience of all that we have worked with, all that we have supported, all that we have interacted with. But they are also a very deep platform. And with that depth comes...
What does deep mean?
Well, with that depth comes complexity, right? So deep meaning they have lots of options and they have lots of tools. And what back in the day was a very basic VoIP, literally a phone hosted in the cloud solution, is now something that does unified communication. So it does...
What is unified communication?
Yes, unified communication is audio, video, texting. I got to
chat.
Do not disturb on.
I forgot to do that too.
Let me do that right now. In a meeting, don't accept call queues. Can I?
You can do not disturb it, and it'll keep us going.
Okay, do not disturb. So yes, unified communication. It's the idea that you have one unified presence that you can communicate over audio, video, conferences, texting, not just texting, but persistent messaging, meaning you can mark things as remind me later, edit them after you've sent them, which is a little different than text messaging where once you send it.
And on any device, right?
And on yeah, right. Mac, Windows, Linux,
your phone or your laptop or your desktop, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
That can be just as confusing as it is useful. Like features can be really confusing.
Yeah. And what Ring Central is challenged with is that they had originally multiple apps. Some of them they built, some of them they acquired. Glip was the big one they acquired, which was mainly texting, kind of a Slack competitor. And they've been working to merge that into a single app. And actually the client that came on board most recently, right before we all started sheltering in place or working from home, they only know the one app. And that's actually been, I think, a much better experience for them as opposed to those of us, including our own team, who have kind of grown up with the multiple apps. And now as Ring Central starts to force us into a unified app slowly, it's causing some confusion. Now, I think Ring Central could have done a much better job of handling this and messaging this, but this is also pretty typical for anyone outside of Apple, and even Apple messes it up sometimes, is they let the engineers drive the app and the messaging, and we're supposed to all just kind of figure it out. So that's kind of setting the tone for what I want to talk about. And I know we all have some very strong opinions about that. So we can share those. In fact, Michelle, you said that you just joined and you had troubles. And so you had to join a different way. And I could take a guess at what happened, but do you know, did you use two different apps when you joined?
I clicked on the link that you provided,
Mm-hmm.
and it gave me some gobbledygook that I had never seen before, and then I realized I hadn't opened the app, so I had to go through the app and cut and paste the meeting ID.
Mm-hmm. So you did actually get in the first time. It just wasn't fully connected because, you know, you came in as your name. Do you know if that was through
it made me type my name, but then it said, do you
Oh.
still want to join by phone? And I was like, this doesn't look right. And I'm late. I'm going to hang up and try again.
So I'm guessing you came in through the web browser and it wanted you to call in order to hear the audio.
Right.
Which is expected behavior if you're using the web. Excuse me. And so I want to talk about this, but I want to be careful that we don't go down that rabbit hole of just making it even more confusing to everyone out there. So for starters, and maybe Wyatt, you can speak to this, we've learned that in order to help people, we need to almost take away some of these options, because when you have all these options, people get confused about which one they should choose. And
people want a remote control with 2 buttons on it, like an on and off button and a volume switch, right? That's what they want. They don't want lots of options. They want a point of view to say, hey, here's how you're going to, because the same thing happened to me, Michelle. I clicked on the link and it opened a browser. I already had the RingCentral app open. It didn't recognize that. It forced me to go to the browser. So I think they're also making changes behind the scenes too. That,
right. Because before we could click on the link and connect without any problem. So that's changed.
Yes.
Well,
somewhat.
Yeah, but if you'll notice in that link, it has meetings in it, right? So in order to utilize that link, you have to have the meetings app. If you don't have the meetings app, then you're going to get errors. So to, Chad's point, and I think Ben touched on it as well, of simplifying things, having a 2-button remote, really where we want our clients to get, where we're getting, is to have 2 different ways to utilize this very powerful platform. And that is using the RingCentral Unified app on our desktops and the RingCentral app for iOS or Android or whatever your mobile device is. We want to use one app, because within that one app, we have all of the functionality of all of these other applications that are spread out, and from the meetings app to the phone app to the, we want to get everyone unified app on the desktops, and to the RingCentral single app on iOS or on Android.
Yeah, and on some of those app stores, RingCentral has removed the old apps, so you're kind of forced to start using only the new one. But on the Mac, they still allow us to use the old or the new. And where we get into trouble is the old RingCentral app, RingCentral Meetings app is the one that opens when you click on the link. But we don't want to use that app, so the link suddenly becomes useless, which means we have to use the meeting ID. And really, it would be good if we all understood the concept of the meeting ID. And Wyatt, we've talked about this many times, and we kind of came up with, actually, I think you came up with it, this idea of, think of your personal meeting ID as your video conferencing phone number. So we all have a phone number. We have an extension. We have an email address.
They should have just called it that. They should have just said, here's your direct line for voice. Here's your direct line for video. That would have been helpful, I think, to a lot of different people.
Yeah. And I think eventually, thinking long-term, it would be nice if just like our email address does it all, if our email address or some form of that could do all of this. So through the app, you could reach me through my own, Ben.Greiner or whatever the case is. And maybe they'll get there. But I think what complicates it, just to give it a little more context, and on the one hand, I don't want to defend RingCentral too much, because I think they could have done a better job. On the other hand, I have enough experience with apps to know that if we jumped ship every time an app let us down, that would be our full-time job of just constantly switching apps. And sometimes it's better to let them work through it and learn to adapt than to just say, well, this is frustrating, I'm going to go to a different app.
Well, and RingCentral is one of the only, from the research that I've done, it's one of the only platforms out there where you do have presence, being chat, phone, and video conferencing all in one. generally you have to parse those out. So you have, like Cisco WebEx for video conferencing, and then you have, something else for phone. And so RingCentral is, to their credit, I think, trying to bring all of those under one umbrella, which is really nice. They're just maybe not going about it in the best way. So,
no, Google did a nice job. I look at how they have, their big blunder was rebranding a lot of stuff. They kind of made some of these RingCentral mistakes earlier, right? Where they had all these different apps all over the place, and it was really hard to kind of figure out what was what. And, they got rid of a lot of stuff. And now it's just, getting people past the Hangouts Meet. Now it's just Meet kind of thing. But the way that it integrates with where people already live, like their email and things, that was a smart move, right? Because you can do voice or video right there. There's no direct line, or like the links are automatically generated. There isn't a permanent ID really to really get confused. And I can only see, RingCentral going that direction, because it's really nice to have, like a soft phone, right? And Wyatt, to your credit, you've slewed through a lot of rat's nestiness with folks in a real world environment, right? In an organization that, when the quarantine scene, hit us all by surprise, these folks were all, scrambling to figure it out. And maybe you could share, some of the things that you learned from that.
Yeah, it's just to your point, Chad, Google has done it quite well. And I think the reason that they've been able to do that is because they already have you within their ecosystem, right? You already have a Gmail address, or they have their domain. They already have you there. So then they can add all of their products and services tied to that single email address, whereas RingCentral is a separate service. It's not tied to Microsoft. It's not tied to Google, etc. So they're trying
agnostic. You can plug it into all those things, to your point, but it's another layer of complexity, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not nearly as integrated as Google, and something to that end that's still confusing, that I don't quite understand what they're doing, is where if you go into the RingCentral app, the unified app, the unified app, and from Ben's screen here you can see right now there's a box around join, but if you were to choose schedule, for instance, that's still going to generate a meetings link. It doesn't generate a unified app ID, and I don't know why that is. That would take away a lot of this confusion.
Yeah.
Because folks do, as Michelle said at the onset of the conversation, she tried to click on that link. It is nice to be able to just click on a link and have it fire right open. But if we don't have that a la carte meetings app installed, then we're going to run into errors.
Right.
So that would be something that they should have their developer team on now and start getting that ironed out.
It's tricky because there's probably a lot of folks still using the meetings app, myself included, right? That's what came installed on this computer. And so I just, started using it, and they probably can't eliminate that functionality because they would mess it up for a lot of people. But you have to ask yourself, I have to ask myself, you don't have to do anything, but I have to ask myself if just pulling the Band-Aid off, so to speak, would be helpful in this case.
Yeah,
well,
that's why
I really think it would, because if we're pushing folks to use the unified app and we're removing the ability to use the meetings app or any of these other a la carte apps, and we want people to just use the unified app, and that's what they're using, then if you click schedule and it creates a link for the unified app and that's what everyone is using, I don't see an issue there.
Yeah. It's just, it all comes back to there's no perfect solution, because every option has some piece that doesn't quite work the way we would expect it to, whether we break the link or we use an old app, or we start generating meeting IDs that are randomly generated and then we don't understand why they don't work a week later. So what we found is, one, we want to get people to start using the personal meeting ID. And that's what this article is about here. Use your personal meeting ID. And it's a little difficult for me to demonstrate RingCentral while in a RingCentral meeting. So we're just going to have some screenshots. And if anyone does need help with anything in RingCentral, please reach out to us, and our team can help you. But if you go to RingCentral and you open up click on your video icon, if you don't see this screen or some very close variation of this screen, then you're probably using the old app. And the old app is called RingCentral Meetings app. And the new, what we're calling Unified app, is simply called RingCentral, or RingCentral.app if you look in the Finder in the application folder. And RingCentral.app is...
I don't mean to interrupt you, but just so that folks aren't confused, when you see the screenshot here and when you do open the Unified app and you click on the video camera icon, you are going to see RingCentral Meetings in there. That doesn't mean you're using the Meetings app. That means you're still using the Unified app, because they are going to deprecate that Meetings app eventually. And the Meetings functionality is in the Unified app. So don't be swayed by the wording within the Unified app. RingCentral Meetings will still be RingCentral Meetings. Just wanted to point that out, as that might be a little confusing.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for clarifying that. And in fact, I don't see the option on the Mac app, but on the iOS app, you actually have the ability to go into preferences and choose whether you use the Unified app or the old RingCentral Meetings app for your videos.
They've put in a lot more effort into the iOS experience. It's clear, I would love to use the iOS app specifically if I didn't, have the mic and the workstation set up to do these calls properly. But when, walking around resumes and we can get on trains and planes and go places again. I thought that the mobile experience with RingCentral is tough to beat.
Yeah, I think a lot of
any problems with the iOS app. I haven't had any issues with it. Ben?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think a lot of developers do spend time first on iOS because the use case or the user base is so much larger than the Apple base. So they start there. And then if we're fortunate, and that's one of the reasons why we chose RingCentral, because the other providers didn't always spend as much time as even RingCentral does on the Mac app. We were very limited. If we got an iOS app at all, or if we got an iOS app, maybe there was no Apple Mac app, if I said that correctly. Anyway, the point being is we talked about simplifying things, and in our experience, and this plays out with the client I mentioned, who came on fresh, not knowing all the different apps, that we just gave them one app, the Unified app, and they seem to have fewer issues than those of us who have tried to make the switch from multiple apps to a single app. So what I think everyone needs to be aware of is when they start a meeting, schedule a meeting, or join a meeting, you have to be aware of that meeting ID. And our own team has run into this. We've all been guilty, myself included, of starting a meeting that I thought was the right meeting, and it wasn't. And I think a big part of that is when you click start, by default, you get a randomly generated meeting ID. Meaning
it doesn't use personal meeting ID. And meanwhile, we were busy telling people not to use their personal meeting ID for security reasons. All the language really needs to be revamped, because it's confusing even for us. And if it's confusing for us, then you can imagine how confusing it is for everyday folks that don't deal with this schwack all the time.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, the RingCentral wording would be, is, not would be in the passive sense. When you use that start, what they call quick start, if you don't have your settings set to always use your personal meeting ID, as Ben going there, it's going to generate a quote dynamic meeting ID. And
is that the default setting, Wyatt?
I believe so. Yeah. So for a quick start, it's going to create a dynamic meeting ID. And to Chad's point, I do believe that's for security purposes. However, at this point, we've gotten past that by firing up the waiting room. We have the waiting room enabled at all of our clients here at Forget Computers as well. So that's no longer, it's not a security issue to always be using your personal meeting ID or your video conference telephone number, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's several areas where they could make improvements. And here's another one, which is by default, it uses the randomly generated meeting ID. And what we're trying to do is get them to use personal meeting ID. We're all trying to do that. And you're right, Chad, it's more confusing because we used to just randomly generate the meetings and go with it, because then nobody could just randomly show up in our meeting. But then there was some bad press about how that could still technically maybe happen. We needed to enable waiting rooms. If you want extra security, do the passcode, require passcode. I tend to just use the personal waiting room and let people in, which there's no mention of here, so you don't even know that, the waiting room feature. But we,
that would be nice if it gave some kind of feedback about some of the settings, in the hidden machinery. Because the hidden machinery has some really important features, as Wyatt and we all, even Michelle and us, we've talked about this before. How tricky it is to know, if you're going to end up in a waiting room or not when you're setting a meeting. Like, does that apply to all meetings? Or when we first turned that on, I was looking all over the place for any indication, and so that would be helpful. That's a great idea.
Yeah, and then even when you're in a waiting room, are you in the right waiting room? Are you in the correct waiting room? So you need to pay attention. You need to pay attention to your invite, your meeting ID, and are you joining the right meeting? Are you starting the right meeting? And it all revolves around the meeting ID and the idea of the meeting ID as your, video conference phone number.
COVID's been great for QA, isn't it?
Great for what?
For just QA, just quality assurance. And the way these apps, typically they do intensive QA before they release an app, and it just seems in some cases that they just really push. And it's not, RingCentral isn't, this isn't exclusive to them, right? All the companies, all the apps, Zoom and Teams and Slack, everybody has made so many improvements so fast, because people have been like, man, this sucks, fix that. That sucks.
Right.
We've all become beta testers without being asked.
Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely.
So I have a theory, and of course, I don't know this for sure, but RingCentral is clearly working on an app to replace RingCentral meetings, and they call that RingCentral Video, which, as you mentioned earlier, Chad, that's what it should have been called, probably all along, RingCentral Video. There was a time when it was almost a bonus to say, oh, RingCentral leverages Zoom, because everybody wanted Zoom. We even had clients on RingCentral that would hear about Zoom features and say, hey, should we switch to Zoom? And we would say, well, you have Zoom. What do you want to do? And then we would realize they just needed, some settings changed or some training to know how to do that. But then, of course, Zoom got into some bad trouble, which I think last time I looked at their stock price, maybe they're beyond this already, but they got into some trouble where every single day there was bad news about them. So RingCentral, I'm pretty sure, said, well, we're going to push our solution out the door probably before we're ready. So we keep seeing hints of it, RingCentral Video, and there are ways to get to it. But the ways right now are so complex that I can't even tell you how to do it. And if I can't tell you how to do it, I don't want to encourage.
We've already confused everyone. Anyone who's
start using
listening, it's what are they talking about? It is confusing, but it's getting better. It's sleuthing through it. And to Wyatt's credit, when we had a client, that you work, with a lot, and they, how much did we learn about RingCentral in a short period of time?
I could probably go work for them this afternoon.
Seriously.
I could probably go be a tier 3 rep.
Give them some good tips, at the very least.
In the Denver area, I think, Wyatt. Not that I'm encouraging you to.
Oh, great. All right. Well,
remember us.
Yeah.
Although
I'm pretty sure some of the levels of support are outsourced to a place. Sounds like Indiana, but I don't think it is. Someplace else.
Indiana without one of those letters, probably.
Yeah. So I don't know. In summary, if it's even possible to summarize this, I would encourage everyone to use the new newest unified RingCentral app. Forget RingCentral meetings, and forget RingCentral phone. I don't think that even runs anymore on any platform.
They deprecated it. If it does work, it's probably not great, but yes.
RingCentral
app on desktop.
Yeah, RingCentral.
RingCentral. It's just called RingCentral. Forget about the unified part if you want to. Just use RingCentral. No meetings, no phone.
Yeah.
Nothing after RingCentral, just RingCentral.
And then use your personal meeting ID, whether you start a meeting after you've told RingCentral to always use your personal meeting ID, or you can also just click join and click this personal meeting and say join. You're actually starting, if it's your own meeting, you're starting your own meeting. So that is also confusing, but it is possible to go in that way. And then you can also even schedule meetings using your personal meeting ID. But once again, Wyatt and I have found that there are different ways to schedule, and it doesn't always remember the last option that you selected. So you often have to repeatedly check personal meeting ID, personal meeting ID, personal meeting ID, which brings us to one other area I'd like to talk about, which is I personally am done with scheduling in RingCentral meetings. I just schedule in Outlook and use my personal meeting ID.
Yep.
We have another KBase that goes into a little more detail, and I will find that. It's probably this one.
As Ben's looking for that, yeah. You just always you don't have to schedule through RingCentral Unified. You can just create a meeting in Outlook if you know,
whatever.
Google, or whatever.
Google Calendar, however you do your scheduling. Create your event, your personal meeting ID or video conference number in there, just as you would your telephone number. Like if I would say, hey, Chad, 2:00 today, need you to hop on a video call with me. Here's my video conference number, personal meeting ID. And then Chad just types that in. He comes into my waiting room. I let him in. Boom, we're in. Just as if I were scheduling a meeting with him and saying, hey, Chad, need to talk to you too. All the best, Wyatt, with my phone number there. Same difference, just video. Yeah.
So where
There's
people
a caveat to that, and Ben is probably going to point that caveat out.
Maybe we'll see. There's so many caveats. I sometimes get them.
There are.
But
that's the simplest way to do it. But
yeah, and everything we've talked about kind of involves internal meetings. But when you're inviting someone from outside, you do sometimes need to give them a little more information. And by default, if you were to invite someone, or rather, when you're in a meeting, copy the URL, it would look like this, although it would be your personal meeting ID instead of this 1 through 9 that I've put here as a substitute. And then it would look like this for phone numbers. And this is
that's it. Can I interject here too? Where you have your copy URL in there and there's a meeting ID, it's also important, even, waiting room aside or not, try to avoid posting your meeting IDs in public places like social media where anybody, that's still a good practice, right?
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks for that reminder. And this is not a real meeting ID. If
that's
this
why
is, I apologize to whoever has the meeting ID 1 through 9.
All day long.
Yeah. And then if you were to copy the invitation, it would include this. And I personally find this overwhelming, and I don't know how many people get this, and they're just confused by it. It's like too many. Like, what do I do here? So I try to do, when I send a meeting invite, I just do the simplified version where it says join from a PC, Mac, Linux, iOS, or Android here. Now, unfortunately, the caveat, or one of many caveats, is if you're on a Mac and you click that link, it's going to download the old RingCentral Meetings app, which, to be honest, if you don't know any better, it's fine. Just follow the instructions and it will work. But if you already have RingCentral installed and you're using the new unified app, you're going to be like, why is this link not working? And Michelle, that's what you ran into today, I think. Wouldn't open the app, So it hung at the browser saying, well, what do you want me to do? Now you can join from the browser, but then you're limited. You have to call in, and you don't get video either way. You can screen share, but you can't do video. And then if you were on your iPhone, it actually would work much better. It would, well, that's for calling in. That's just for calling in. And then you can manually call in. So if you were on iOS here, it would have worked really well. But regardless, I almost feel like we're overthinking it. If we're inviting someone into RingCentral meetings, let's just assume they don't know anything about RingCentral meetings. 9 times out of 10, that link is going to work. And if it doesn't, they can figure out whether they're an iPhone user or if they need to call in. So this, I think, is much easier than this. And I've chosen, the Chicago number, Chicago area, 773. I don't know, do people care whether they call locally anymore? I mean,
I think it depends. I think there's some rural area, like far-flung parts of the world where it might still matter, right? I mean, like we have a client that is in Wales, for example, and there's some things that work specifically well for him and not specifically well for him. And so I think they're trying to, be inclusive, but there's a balance somewhere between inclusivity and, esoteric, garbledy-gook that's really confusing for people. That's not an easy thing to balance.
Now, the good news is, and once again, I don't want to complicate things, but I do know the new RingCentral video solution, which we've seen hints of, which does not use Zoom. It's built from the ground up by RingCentral. It does those things that don't work in the browser. They do work. And one link will get you into the meeting, into a browser, full video, full sharing, a lot of cool things. The two things, though, that so far for me are stopping me from adopting that, other than the fact that it can be confusing as to how to even get there. Feels like it's a secret room I have to keep finding every time I want to go looking for it. Is I don't see breakout rooms, and I know some of our clients use breakout rooms, and I don't see waiting room. And I've grown to really like that feature and to not have to use a passcode to let people in. So hopefully they're going to finish that or fix that. But
I think they go ahead, Brett.
One of the things I wanted to add in to what Ben is saying here. So all of this information that you see, the gobbledygook, if you will, exactly that whole area. If you do want to generate all of that information, you do have to schedule from the RingCentral unified app. You can't simply create an event in in Outlook, in Google Calendar. So to that end,
with one caveat, or maybe you're going to say so.
To that end, so what I've been suggesting to our clients that use the RingCentral app, and they have it already, that's where I was suggesting that you don't necessarily need to schedule and use the scheduling feature through RingCentral. Now, if you need to have people on the video call that are outside your organization that might not have RingCentral installed, that's when you'd want to use the scheduling feature to generate all of this information so that they can get in. Yeah, exactly.
And now I would take it a step further.
You can just create the calendar. But I'm sorry, go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I would say you don't even need to use the scheduler app. You just need to copy and paste this information here, put in your own personal meeting ID, and keep it someplace that you could always reference. So, keep it in notes or text edit or as a.
That's advanced, man.
Yeah, an alternate signature.
All of it stays the same. I mean, it's always going to be the same. That information doesn't change every time you schedule a meeting. It just regurgitates the same information every single time. So,
that's right. These phone numbers do not change. It's just the meeting ID. The one click and the URL, it's all the same. It's just the meeting ID. And in fact, there is a way here, because we've had some clients say, well, my client doesn't have permission or their network doesn't allow them to install RingCentral. Well, you can make it a little easier and send them straight to the browser with this URL. And maybe that's too complex because I don't know that a lot of people understand that, but if that were a real meeting ID, they could get right in, with the caveat that they still have to call in and they won't have video. Now, those problems will go away in the new RingCentral video version, but we don't know when that's going to be really usable. So until then, yeah, I would just say this is what you need to do. You need to have this in a safe place. Maybe it's an alternate signature in your email, so you can just select it as a signature, cut it out, and put it where you need to in your meeting invite. But this is what we want to focus on.
My face is melting.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a lot.
That has been a real challenge of how to simplify this messaging into something that says always do this and never do that. It doesn't
without
work.
Any caveats.
Always do this.
Caveats are really confusing.
Yeah.
To people. I think that's what they're struggling with. This episode of the Forget Computers show has been brought to you by the laws of user experience, particularly Hick's Law, which states that the time it takes to make a decision increases with the number and complexity of choices.
Sounds good. I'll go with it. In fact,
I could try to summarize everything since I've been moving all of this through my brain, but I'll wait until we're done talking unless you want me to do it now.
No, I was going to say, before you do it, I was just about to say, I sat down with all intentions of writing this article with like 3 bullet points. Like, just do this. And by the end of it, I'm like, oh my God. And then I tried to simplify it. And basically that's how we got to this version here, which is slightly more simple. But if anyone has suggestions on how to make it even simpler, we're still trying. And just a reminder to everyone, we do have a whole section on RingCentral. Some are older articles mentioning GLIP. These are the newer ones up top. But yeah, any feedback is welcome. And Wyatt, let's bring it home with an ultra simple summary.
Take us home, Wyatt.
Well, suggestions. So on your desktop, only use the RingCentral Unified app. When you're using the RingCentral Unified app, make sure that you have your settings set to, as Ben had open on one of those pages, to always use your personal meeting ID or your video conference telephone number. That's one. 2, use your iOS device. As Chad has said, the iOS version of RingCentral, it's great. It works really well. So those 2 pieces of software should be the only 2 that you should be wrangling with. If you're still wrangling RingCentral meetings, RingCentral phone, RingCentral, Steak and Shake, whatever. RingCentral.
But I love the Steak and Shake app. No, I don't.
And the RingCentral iOS app. Start with those 2. Make sure you have your settings set to always use your personal meeting ID. And then try to get into the mindset that your personal meeting ID is how people contact you when they want to contact you via video. Just like you would dial me at 303-555-WYATT, that's too many digits to call me via voice, you would dial my personal meeting ID from either the Unified app or the iOS app to get me video. As Ben suggested, I think that's a very good idea to create maybe a secondary signature in your email platform of choice that has not only your telephone number in it, but your personal meeting ID / video conferencing phone number in there as well. And then you can just hit join, dial that number in, and you're in a video call. So start there. Start with just those 2 pieces of software. Make sure that you have it set to always use your personal meeting ID / video conference number. You'll be starting to get to more of a place of simplicity.
Oh, there is an upside. Can I illuminate the upside to all this confusion?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Light it up.
The upside to all this confusion is, everyone's under a lot of stress, right? There's a lot of folks. We're very lucky that we can continue to do, a lot of things are business as usual for us. But for most people, it's still working from home in a pandemic, right? There's still so many differences, but people are so stressed out, and the mental health days that I've noticed, different people taking and the timing of all that. Sometimes I think that the frustration of this gives people license to be like, F it, I'm not going to participate in this meeting. When this gets all straightened out, we'll have far fewer excuses. So enjoy it while it lasts, right? It's not going to last. It won't. It'll get easier to use, and we'll forget all about these days of.
Yeah, and well, one more tip about simplification, because I've had a couple conversations with clients and even with our own team, and this was something that I was doing for a long time, and that is, choose a platform and try to stick with it. Meaning, there was a long time where I was using my iPhone. Like, where's my iPhone? It's in my pocket. I was using my iPhone for most of my phone calls, and then I would use my computer for my video calls. And I was switching back and forth with the audio headsets, and sometimes it just wouldn't work. Like the switch wouldn't work. In fact, just the other day, I did it for one reason or another, and I went back to the app, and I could hear the person, but they couldn't hear me. I had to restart the app. Everything worked. But now I've decided I will just use the Mac app for everything. That's just how I work. It's easier for me to switch between apps, between Teams, between RingCentral, between phone calls, between video. I have all these options, and I consistently use the Mac with the same headphones, and it works so much better. One of the clients I talked to, they didn't even realize they could make phone calls from the Mac app. They thought it was just for texting and video. They didn't know they could make phone calls. And he's like, how do I do that? And I said, you see the phone icon? He's like, oh, I just didn't even realize that icon was there. Just kept skipping over it. And once he noticed it, he started making phone calls. And Wyatt, I think you and Chad and even Michelle have all had issues with audio switching, between devices.
Michelle, what do you find yourself using more often? Like I can tell, I get the impression you're on a Mac today, but do you go to the mobile version, or what's your general?
No, I never use the mobile version because it's too difficult with transferring calls and looking up people's extensions. So
gotcha.
Yeah, I'm always using the Mac.
Okay. Yeah. See, that's another angle that I think is really important, because when I do certain things like scheduling and all that jazz, I generally want to use the full-blown desktop app. But for answering calls, like Ben, your story about, someone not even knowing they can use it as a soft phone. Soft phones, I think, are probably going to become more norm, right? Which is meaning a software-driven phone, a number that's ringing on our mobile device that's not really our mobile number, like our work number, to transfer to, it's really nice, but there is a bit of a learning curve.
Yeah. And of course, if you're having problems with one device, we may ask you to try a different device as a troubleshooting step. But because way back in the day, the iOS version was more robust, and we kind of relied on that. And I think that's where my habits came from. I was using that. And then one day I'm like, why am I doing this? I'm just going to go all into the Mac, and it seems to work better for me. So,
and to Ben's point of us here at Forget being able to support you and help you through this, if you're using the Unified app, we're going to be able to help you a lot easier and identify where issues lie and where caveats are. If you're just using one piece of software versus using multiple pieces of software, or iOS versus and so please try to use the RingCentral app on the Mac if that's going to be your platform of choice. And as Michelle said, most of us are tasking on our computers, whether it's scheduling or designing or whatever we're doing in our normal workflow. Use that Unified app. Then we can help support that a lot easier than if we're trying to figure out, well, is it this app, or is it that, or is it your phone? So again, we want you to simplify things to make your life easier, also to allow us to support you more effectively and efficiently.
Yeah. And we'll send this video to RingCentral too, see what they say.
Okay, so while I have you, can we go into the calendar for our team meeting on Thursdays? Because there's 2 entries and one is wrong, and I never know which one it is, and I'm not the only one.
Okay, let's wrap up this meeting just so we have a cut.
It's like, while we have you guys.
I can say thank you, goodbye. We'll see y'all next week.